Welcome, everybody, to the Journey Conversations with publisher Kris Millegan. Today, we are going to be talking. I am your co-host, A.W. Finnegan. Today, we are going to be talking to author Linda Miner, who co-authored Gangster Planet, where being connected means never having to say you're sorry. Uh, Gangster Planet is a wild ride exploring the ever-evolving world of drug trafficking, money laundering, and stock swindles. Written in an engaging and accessible style, this book not only informs but entertains as it delves into the historical progression of criminal activities. As technology rapidly advances, so too do the methods of those engaged in illegal enterprises. The book reveals how modern criminals adapt their strategies, seamlessly integrating new techniques into their operations. It also uncovers the collaboration between drug traffickers and so-called professional white-collar criminals who play a crucial role in laundering illicit profits through global public corporations. An alternative subtitle could be The Evolution of Organized Crime into a Global Enterprise. And Linda Miner is a retired attorney, formerly licensed in Texas, whose legal specialty was real property law and land titles. She has a second career as a blogger and a researcher for Daniel Hopsicker and other published authors. She lives near Austin, Texas, with her British-born husband and two cats. And Daniel Hopsicker was her co-author on this book, who has now passed away. And Linda, we will be talking to Linda Miner today. So, without further ado, here's your host, Kris Millegan.
Thank you, Adam, very much. And Adam is also an author, too. He's the author of A Sleeper Agent, a book about biological warfare. Linda, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, you're kind of a hidden person out there. You don't really do a lot of public speaking. You're kind of behind the scenes. And, I would uh, talk to people about you, and I'd say, well, I know this lady in Texas, and she's a lawyer, and I call her a courthouse basement lawyer because she's able to go in the basement of the courthouses and tell you who really owns things. And she's been a very valuable behind the scenes researcher for many people. She was the main researcher for Russ Baker's book, Family of Secrets, and many others. And then, well, she met Daniel, and Daniel was God bless Mr. Hopsicker. He was a very interesting person. I met him, over the internet, how I met Linda and how I met Adam. And I was running an email list called CIA Drugs. And, well, actually, there was an email list called CIA Drugs run by this guy by the name of Bob. And it went on for a while, but then it imploded because, oh, there
Well,
was
you
people.
before that, Kris, you had conspiracy research theory.
Yeah, conspiracy theory research list. I had that email list
That's the one I
going,
joined first.
right, and then there was a CIA drugs one, and then it imploded, and then Daniel and we enjoyed being on that list, so he started one and I started one, and then we merged them, and they became a list that was around for quite a while, and a lot of interesting things happened on that because some of the quote unquote spooks didn't really like us talking about CIA drugs, and they sent spooks in there to try and have it implode. And actually, Daniel was one of the first ones to say, there's something hinky going on with this Rupert guy here. And, it took a while to figure out what that hinkiness was. And I remember one thing when I see something hinky out there, I generally just give people rope because at some point in time they either hang themselves or go they go back to the boilerplate, and just start repeating all the BS. And I've known Linda a long time. These email lists started in the uh,
About
sometime in the
19,
1990s.
yeah, 96 probably.
Right, right. And I remember one time Linda and we decided, well, we're going to see who owns stuff, and we kind of figured out that really who owns stuff is accounts receivable, because they'll bust out any corporation even if they own it, if they can get other people to put money in there, and then they buy it back for uh, pennies on the dollar. But let's talk about Gangster Planet. Okay, where being connected means never having to say you're sorry, which was a tagline that Daniel came on pretty early on, and Daniel was a journalist. Okay, I mean, I'm a musician songwriter. Okay, I read a lot of books, and my daddy told me some stuff. Okay, but and I really wasn't a journalist. Okay, I started looking into this stuff and writing and different things. But Daniel was a real live journalist, and once he started figuring stuff out, it just it he was amazed at the corruption that he found, and then he started just to track the corruption. And I mean, how much corruption did Daniel find, Linda?
Well, how much could he find? Well, he suspected it was just about everywhere, but he wasn't. Suspicion wasn't enough with him. He had to zero in on facts and the evidence that that proved the people that he was researching were really corrupt. Um, but he started with I think you've told people about this before, with the boys on the tracks in Arkansas. That was really his first political investigation, and it just grew from there, because every time he was sure he had proven the corruption, uh, it would change. They would shut him down, or like he had done this for the business program that he had in California, where he would do little blurbs for NBC or different networks, and he found this. Uh, uh, what it was, a book I think had been written or was being written by Linda Ives, and he wanted to investigate it. So he went out there with his crew and was just amazed
Yeah,
at the drug smuggling that was going on, and the power that was connected to covering it up.
yeah, yeah. He thought, he thought it was just a bunch of right wing hooey. He didn't, he'd been reading it and he wanted to do a updated In Search Of.
Yeah,
And so he went out there and he got the mother of one of those kids in chair, and he had his camera on her and everything, and he's sitting there, she's a powerful lady when she
yeah,
talks, you know. And he heard her, and he says, "Wow, this isn't just some little thing. This is." He envisioned, a big 2 hour special on HBO.
yeah,
The Birmingham bombing thing by Spike Lee had just come out,
yeah,
and he was thinking, well, he could expose this corruption, and he got back to he got his rough thing back to L.A. and showed it to his agent, who was the agent for uh, Robin Williams and Billy Crystal. Okay, and his agent told him, says, "Well, Daniel, this isn't going to air." And Daniel, he kept working on it with a friend of his there, and then that friend got run off his road. And Daniel said, "Well, gosh, I didn't do this to get anybody, hurt." So he went off to some motel by the Colorado River and wrote "Burying the Boys."
Mm.
And
Yeah, that was actually like 3 years after he had a play that ran for a year in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard. So he was, he was a pretty fun-loving, happy-go-lucky guy at the time, and then he got sidetracked into this, and he was about to lose his career, and all he was trying to do was find out the truth,
yeah,
and that made him mad.
yeah, yeah. Well, the Boys on the Tracks is such a, the story is okay. Well, basically, in Arkansas for a while, there was duffel bags falling out of the sky filled with cocaine, and the word got around the high schools that this was happening, so kids were camped out in the woods waiting for duffel bags full of cocaine to fall out of the sky. And in researching these subjects of CI drugs, one thing that we found with the corruption is they had to have a local person too. They had to have somebody at the county level that was involved, and we generally found that it was either the sheriff or the DA. And it happened in this county. It was the DA, but they ran the story. There was these two kids, and they the story, and the quote unquote official story, all the way to be released from the Arkansas medical examiner, was that these kids had smoked so much marijuana that they fell asleep on the train track and it ran over them and killed them. Well, it just so happened that one of that mother, uh, her husband was an engineer on that. He wasn't on that train on that day, but they were able to look at things, and they then found out that one of the kids was stabbed and the other one was shot too. Okay. And it was because uh, George H.W. Bush, as the vice president under Ronald Reagan, one of his big things was to take all these separate um, drug runs that some have been going on for decades, okay, but they started to step on each other's toes. And so he was taking all these drug runs and making them semi-official and putting them through Arkansas, and putting the money through the bond market there. And
Yeah. Uh, that was Bill Clinton's claim to fame, was the finance, what was it, Arkansas Finance Development Company or something
right,
like that. And that they would issue bonds to make Arkansas a beautiful, wonderful city or state with Little Rock was supposed to be great, but they were using drug money to do it. And Bush had cut Clinton in on it. And of course, as we learned from another uh, ex-CIA drug smuggler, Terry Reid, uh, William Barr was in on it too, and Oliver North. It was just the most incredible story that you could ever hope to find, and Daniel had found it.
right. I mean, it's corruption. I mean, the drugs
And
create this big pile of money, and then they pass the money out to people so that they can break the law.
yeah,
Okay, and I mean, the whole thing about the drugs being illegal that's another long story.
Well,
Okay.
that's where Daniel's tagline came in. He wanted something catchy, so he says, well, being connected means you never have to say you're sorry. Back
Mhm.
then, that love story was a big hit. And, you know, uh, where what was his name? The main star in the movie says, love means never having to say you're sorry. And so Daniel took that and changed it to being connected means never having to say you're sorry, because they get away with it. They never have to apologize. They never have to go to prison. They just, you know, they've got connections.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And, you know, the level of, I mean, the level of corruptions that he finds, because he, you know, the drugs come in, okay, they make a big pile of money, okay, but that's quote unquote illegal money, okay, so you gotta wash
wash
it
it.
and make it clean, okay, and you tie that in with all the pump and dumps and everything, and the corruption is just off the
Yeah.
charts, you know. And
Yeah, the no, it was the Wall Street Journal back then had a writer that kept hinting that something was going on with Clinton. They wanted to blame it all on him. So they came up with this bond salesman, and I don't think he was connected to Jackson Stevens, but he was Bill's private,
Lassiter.
yeah, and Dan Lassiter, and so the Wall Street Journal kept saying, well, who is this Dan Lassiter? And they wanted somebody else to disclose that, oh, he's Clinton's man, and that's who's behind all this corruption. But really, Clinton was doing it for George H.W. Bush and the Reagan administration, who wanted to find a way to finance uh, the war
Contras.
going on in Nicaragua,
Right. Right.
which Congress had shut down.
Yeah, yeah. Again, illegal corruption, and I used to say, there should have been Klieg lights at Daniel's door there in Venice, Florida, because he broke so many stories over and
Yeah,
over again, and sometimes you would see little glimmers of it in the mainstream.
yeah.
Okay, but they would never, talk to Daniel directly. And then, Daniel stumbles across basically Huffman Aviation and Mohammed Atta and the
Mhm.
people that, supposedly flew the planes on 9/11. Okay. And again,
Well, he went to visit his parents after Barry and the Boys came out.
mhm,
They lived in Sarasota, and they'd been living there since 1987, somewhere around there. So he goes out there, and it just so happens that he was waiting for his book to come out when 9/11 happened. And it happened, and so he's looking at the newspaper, and it says Venice. Yeah, his parents actually lived in Venice, which is a small town in Sarasota County, and that's where the circus lived and died. When it went out of well, it
business
was
there.
sold, and it had its headquarters there in Venice, uh, Florida, and you know I went out there several times to work with Daniel on the book, and Venice is a very small town, and you would think nothing happened without everybody knowing about it. But here was this this whole 9/11 thing that went back to some Saudi, uh, supposedly they were doing their flight training there, even though it appeared that they already knew how to fly. And that kind of intrigued Daniel. And he would drive up and down the streets and go to the apartments where they supposedly lived. And, you know, that's what you mean by he was an investigative reporter. He really investigated.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, he found out about the pink-haired stripper that
Yeah.
Mohammed Atta was living with and was going out with, you know,
Yeah.
and he confirmed it from the apartment manager. He confirmed it from the neighbors in the apartment.
Yeah.
He confirmed it from the postman. He confirmed it from
Yeah.
quite a few people, you know. And he called me up and he said, you know, and he wrote this incredible story. Okay. And we contacted the National Enquirer and a couple other of the supermarket tabloids, and one of the guys says, "Mohammed Atta and a pink-haired stripper. Wow, we got it. It'll be in the next issue, you know." And it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
And
we found out about David Pecker later on, didn't we?
Right. Well, Daniel, because Burying the Boys also got published in Germany. Okay. So Daniel had a publisher there, and and so they got the story published in the biggest newspaper in Germany. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Spiegel.
And it got shut down right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
They declared
Well, you
Daniel
know,
to be an
Anthony
anti-Semite. Okay.
Anthony
Wow.
Summers came to he spent a month in Sarasota County and around Venice, and Daniel took him to all of these apartments and introduced him to his cabbie and everybody else. And I've seen the memos, the emails that Summers sent back to Daniel saying, "Oh, well, you really don't have enough evidence here that our legal team will allow us to publish any of these as facts."
Right. I mean, and you know, the simple fact that the gentleman who owned Huffman Aviation, okay, that were two of these guys, the 9/11 guys trained on, had his plane get busted with 47 pounds of
Yeah.
heroin.
I remember
And
that.
Well,
which
that's really where the book Gangster Planet picks up with the first two books.
right.
It's
Mhm.
because Daniel's, you know, after Welcome to Terrorland was put away, it was 2 years later, it's 2006, that Daniel sees in the paper that there's this big airplane bust in Mexico. And so that started him wondering, and he got a call telling him that the plane itself was involved. Its registration had the address of where Huffman Aviation had been. And so Daniel gets out of bed. He didn't ever sleep at night. He worked at night and slept during the day.
I know how that is.
He gets out of bed, or off his computer, wherever, and drove out to Huffman Aviation's offices, and starts looking around. Of course, I've been there, and if you're standing in front of the Huffman building, you look across the street and you can see the trapezes swaying in the wind because it's right across from where the circus used to go to bed.
Huh.
Mhm.
But and it was a real eerie feeling for him to be there where all this had happened. And
Right.
He wanted
I
to.
mean, and this plane that crashed in Mexico had like 20 tons of cocaine, okay, all packaged in these attaché cases that had the words private or something like that
Privado
across
in
them.
Spanish. Yeah,
And this plane was made up to look like it was from Homeland Security. Had a nice little logo and stuff like this. And
Wow.
and this crash got covered in the Mexican press, okay,
Mhm.
and got covered up in the
yeah,
American press, even though, I mean, Daniel was, live on the internet
yeah.
talking about it. Okay, but the American press was, oh, we can't, we don't hear anything, we don't know anything
Yeah.
about
Well,
this.
this was
I
it.
mean, then there was two planes, you know.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. It's like a year and a half later, there's another plane in Mexico that doesn't get busted, but it crashes because it ran out of fuel. And it's, it kind of in a rural area close to where the first plane was busted. And so it turned out that the plane could be connected back to this first plane.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and I
that's,
mean that Gangster Planet is a lot about these two planes and a couple of big ships that got caught with a lot of
yeah,
cocaine in it, and looking at who owned it, and one thing that Daniel shows is how these planes, oh, they got busted over here. Oh well, we'll forget that, and we'll move it over here to these guys, and then they'll fly it for. I mean, it's
yeah.
just a
Well, what he did is he tied both planes to the same airport. And that was the Fort Lauderdale. No, Fort Lauderdale was where the Whittington brothers were operating, and
no.
they
This
had
was the
bought.
Clearwater.
It was
Mhm.
Clearwater, uh, St. Petersburg Airport, and so he starts investigating that, and he finds connections that go way back to Claire Chennault and the Chinese uh, during World War II and
Right.
during and after World War II.
Well, it's a bunch of those people that were in China that because Chiang Kai-shek was really one of the first governments that was ran on opium money,
Yeah,
and they basically brought some of that model here.
yeah.
Even though there was older there was older drug runs that had also been running, but then this was the main crew through Chenault and Paul Hellowell, however you say his name, that started to create the entities.
The
Uh,
CIA. It was this Air America, uh, the the whole sea supply. It was their way of financing. It was, it's like they say they're running the drugs and they think, well, this is a good thing because it finances all of these operations to get rid of drugs. Now, if that is the dumbest thing anybody could ever hope to imagine,
Mhm.
that the
well, yeah,
CIA is fighting drugs by using the drug money.
right. Well, I mean, I've been digging into this a long time, read a lot of different books about it. I remember reading this one book in it, and some general pops up and says, well, the world's a seamy place, and we're going to be the big butt on the bench. Well, we need to be the big butt on the bench. They're thinking, well, if we can control it, but, um, corruption isn't really controllable so much, okay, and they because
There are a lot of hungry
you
poor
start
people.
with a the the intelligence service brings in the drugs. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to sit on them? No, they got to find somebody to sell them. So they start working with criminal gangs, okay, to sell to sell the things. And then I want to go back just a little bit further. Okay. I mean, if you're a Rockefeller, you can pretty much do what you want, right? Okay. But you see, there's these two big black operations of the government. Okay. One of them is COG, continuance of government. Okay. And that's basically based in started in West Virginia. And then the other big black operation is this drug running, okay? And it was basically based in Arkansas because you have mountains there, okay? And you can do whatever you want in the mountains till somebody with a gun comes up there and says,
Yeah.
don't do that, okay? So why did the Rockefellers, okay, go to West Virginia and Arkansas and say, well, you guys need some help with governance, okay? It's a way of getting, platforms in there that then allow for the corruption to continue to happen, okay? And so he was first looking at the CIA and other some other intelligence agencies and military, bringing in these drugs, and then he started looking at criminal gangs, okay, because that's really it's not so much the intelligence services that are running them now. I mean, they say, we don't need you anymore. These criminal gangs are just using the corruption that's already there to continue to corrupt our system.
Well, the CIA started with uh, was it Luciano
Yeah,
and World War II.
right. That was before the CIA. That was
Yeah,
naval intelligence,
right. But I
right,
mean,
and
they
FBI.
started there because the operation had been a Republican operation in New York with Governor Dewey, who was supposed to win the election and lost. And so we ended up with Truman. And then Truman is the one that actually signed the legislation to create the CIA. But it was already in the works there. And I think Truman really had no clue what was being hidden from him about
Right.
how Luciano and Meyer Lansky had gone into Cuba and started bringing the French drugs through Cuba, or the Indo-Chinese drugs. And that brings us back to your story about your daddy and uh, having a picnic,
Right.
because it all started about that time when Lansdale was having a picnic and telling your dad how they were going to opiate an entire generation of Americans so that they could expand their operations.
Right, right. And control them, you
Yeah,
know. And so
but they were more interested in the marketing. I mean, Lansdale was an advertising agent. That's how he before he went into the army, he was in advertising. And of course, one of the biggest needs for advertising was General Motors. And this is what I've been working on since I finished the book. Was General Motors was mostly owned by the DuPont family. And you talk about West Virginia earlier with Rockefeller. DuPont was really into making things out of coal and creating a chemical industry. And so, plastics, like in the old Graduate movie, that's where the future is in plastics. But you can always take this drug money and use it in research and development and create a clean, so-called clean. I don't think chemicals are exactly that clean, but you create a new industry that is reputable, at least, out of the drug money. And, Rockefellers were really good at that.
Right.
But you could go on and on and on about all of this, but it all, when you trace the source of much of today's industry
Mhm.
and yesterday's industry, it all goes back to drug money.
Yeah. Yes,
Even
it does.
from the East India Company days.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing that, I wrote in the publisher's forward was about, this book is complicated, and that's because, financial crimes, financial corruption is complicated, okay, by design, okay,
Yeah.
and just, how it happens. So,
Well, also it's because of the need to know factor. They keep uh, they categorize all the little operations so that one person doesn't know what's going on by the other people. And so they may suspect that there's some connection, but they don't know what it is. And that way you can keep these things separated in a way that people can't figure out what's going on. They can't really see that the core of the conspiracy is the drugs.
yeah, yeah. Adam, you have any thoughts or questions for Linda?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was particularly interesting how he was showing all of the corruption of the alt-right, how he was bringing a lot of attention to that whole aspect because, I know people who I tell them about this book. I say, oh, well, you should check out Daniel Hopsicker's Gangster Planet, because then you'll see some of the corruption on that side. And I thought it was a really like I haven't read it yet. I've been able to go through it, but I do look forward to it. It's heavily cited, just like my book. A lot of citations after every chapter, and it's just there's a wealth of information in here. I can't wait to go through it.
Yes, indeed. Linda, so what did Daniel hope that this book would do?
Oh, it's hard to say. I spent election night with Daniel in 2020.
Hmm.
Uh, and, of course, we won that election, but by the time we still didn't know it at the time that night after it was over. And I went back to my Airbnb, and Daniel stayed up doing research. And I was thinking, oh, there's a hurricane coming. I've got to get home earlier than I thought. And so the next morning I talked to Daniel on the phone, and he says, they're planning a coup. And I said, I was really hoping that we were going to get this book put to bed. And here he was off on a new conspiracy. And he knew that night that there was going to be a coup. And that's all he could think of. And I didn't believe him until January 6th. But by election day, before he went to bed, Daniel knew what was being planned and what we're living through right now. And I sometimes think, it was good that he didn't live to see it, because it upset him so badly at the time that and so many of us are looking at it now and we're saying, what are we going to do about it? Daniel would not have rested until he had an answer for that question.
Right. He'd be blowing a gasket. He'd be blowing several gaskets,
Yeah.
And you know, again,
he was furious with me because I couldn't see it, and I just said we're here to work on this book, and all you're going to do is research this coup, which I put in quotation marks because I wasn't sure that was happening, and I drove back to Texas, left him there by himself, and he didn't speak to me for several days because I didn't get it. And he was so far ahead, always figuring out, exactly what was going on.
right. Well, it's he tells me, he tells me, he says, listen to your doctor, because he felt he didn't listen to his doctor, and that got him into the position where, he was very ill. And the other thing he would say often a lot was, if I was in another country, I'd be dead, because of the research that he did. And he um well,
Yeah,
he upset a lot of people in 9/11 because, he wouldn't just jump to the conclusion.
yeah.
He was very,
He
again,
had to have the proof.
he was a journalist, and he could see where people were jumping to things that weren't true for, and I mean, and I ended up seeing where, 9/11 was used to get people to fight each other. Oh, you don't believe this? Well, you must be, something. So we all need to be careful. Okay. I've used the term caveat lector. Okay,
Yeah,
be aware of what you read. Okay, don't be afraid to read something or to watch something or to hear something, but be very careful on what you believe and what you base, what you're saying on,
yeah. Well,
because
people will see a meme and they'll start spreading it without
Oh
even
yeah,
knowing where it came from or who.
yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
and I mean, hell, I've posted wrong things, I mean, everybody does. But
Yeah.
again, we need to be careful, and we need to remember, what America is, and what, a and what Mr. Franklin said, a republic if you can keep it. Uh, any last words, Linda?
No, I've enjoyed this. This is the first interview I've ever had live on tape or whatever you use nowadays, and I'm ready to do it again.
Well, good. Thank you. And again, and the book is Gangster Planet, where being connected means never having to say you're sorry, by Daniel Hopsicker, God bless him, and Linda Miner, God bless her. Onwards to a better future for our children.
Onwards.
God bless you, Kris.